How's it going, guys? Kyle here with 4 Mile Ranch, and today I'm really excited to be talking to you about something that I've been working on for a while and that I'm excited to share with you. So that is a thermal clip-on comparison. So what I have before me is 5 relevant 640 core thermal clip-ons. Now this came about because I get a lot of comments asking what would I pick, the SIG CV25, which seems to be all the rage lately. I had a very positive review of it because I've had a very positive experience with this guy. But that kind of by default has people asking me, well, what would you pick, the CV25 or the Infrared RH25V2, another renowned thermal clip-on? So obviously we're gonna compare these, but I thought I'd do you one better and also throw in the D&T Hydra. So HS635, another very relevant unit, and it's gotten a lot of attention because of the price point that this one comes in is roughly a third of the Hydra, for example. So that catches a lot of attention, rightfully so. But there's 2 more units I think are relevant and worth throwing into the mix as well. So we have the Armasight Operator 640. That is, again, a 640 core clip-on, and the Guide SenseSmart TB630. The Guide doesn't seem to get the attention it deserves. I know more people are discovering them as a thermal brand, and when they do, I've pretty much seen only positive experiences. All these units I've been using for a while now. If you want more details than the top level stuff we'll cover in this video, I encourage you to check the channel for the dedicated reviews. On that note, guys, these videos are a lot of work to put together, so I ask you as kindly as I can, if you appreciate this kind of content, at the very least, please consider subscribing, leave a like on the video, comment, whatever you can do to stimulate the algorithm and circulate this to more people so that the time put into this is worthwhile on my end. I do appreciate sharing this information, but YouTube makes it very discouraging to continue with this. So at the very least, I ask you to consider subscribing. That will encourage companies to send more gear like this so I can do bigger and better videos and more videos of this form factor. Now, if you want to take it a step further and you want to financially support the channel, since YouTube doesn't, you can go over to the 4 Mile Ranch Patreon page. If you would have been a subscriber over there, you would have known this has been in the works for a while. I get a lot of comments asking people asking me to do this, and little did they know that you would have already had some information about this comparison prior to YouTube ever seeing it or hearing about it. If feeling good about supporting the channel and the content isn't enough, I do give stuff away the first of the month every month over there, so there is some gain for you as well. Now, Optics Planet is another supporter of the channel. Just so you guys know, code 4MRR will save you at least 7% off. I think the record is 12% off depending on promotions. So if you want to save a pretty penny on some of the things that we're talking about today, I encourage you to go in there and save you some coin. I don't get kickback from that. You guys just save money. And last but not least, Warhammer Armaments is another supporter of the channel right now. So they dabble in all things night vision and thermal as well. They are some master armorers, and you can check out some more about them in the link tree below. So let's just talk about the overview about what we're gonna cover in this video. My goal is to give you the insights as if you try these all for yourself to make a determination on what may be right for you for the different price points. I try not to be the, hey, no, you gotta go with this, because that's a little bit subjective. My channel is all about providing you with actual quantifiable performance metrics. One thing to consider is that, like I said, some of these are kind of a 4-in-1. So the Infrared, for example, I guess we'll go in order. 640 core, it does function as a clip-on thermal. Obviously, you can use it as a standalone optic. And because of its small size and form factor, it does work as a helmet-mounted device as well as a pretty viable handheld device as well. So 4 functions. The SIG CV25 is a great thermal clip-on. It does work very well as a dedicated optic. Technically, nothing is stopping you from holding it as a handheld, but the form factor starts getting a little bit larger and you definitely cannot helmet mount this. So this is kind of going from jack of all trades, and we're kind of getting a little bit more refined. Similarly to the CV25, the D&T Hydra HS635 is a solid 3-in-1 device, everything but helmet mounting. Again, the form factor gets a little bit bigger for using as a handheld compared to the RH25V2. These are a little harder to fit in a pocket, but it can still be done. But on the other end of the spectrum here, with the Armasight Operator and the Guide TB630, these are what I consider to be more dedicated thermal clip-on devices. And the reason for that is neither of these have an adjustable rear diopter. And you may think that that's a bad thing. The Armasight, for example, this is actually properly optically collimated from the factory. So they use a number of different optics, and they make sure that the collimation, and for those that aren't aware of what that means, is you're putting a digital image in front of your daytime scope when you mount these. If that image is not overlaying with the true view that you should see through your optic, your daytime optic, well, that's off, then what you think you're aiming at won't be what you're really aiming at. So you want that to stay aligned. So the operator is optically aligned out of the box, where it should be minimal work to then fine tune it digitally, and that's a big deal. So that's part one. But both the operator and the guide TB630 have what I'm going to refer to as kind of a negative magnification. So when you hold up like the RH25 V2 and you have the screen, you hold it up, it's kind of a 1-to-1 image. The operator makes it feel like the screen is further away, and it's the same with the guide TB630. And you may think that that's not great, and it's not great if you want to use it as a dedicated optic or for a handheld. However, when you get that negative magnification, that scrunched down screen inside optically, it looks that way, and you put it in front of a daytime rifle scope, well, now you have more field of view and you can optically zoom in with that rifle scope to a more comfortable range before things get pixelated. So these kind of represent the dedicated clip-ons. And I just wanted to point that out. A lot of people don't really talk about that I've seen in the forums, but that is something to consider. If you know you only care about using it as a clip-on, then maybe you need to look into the actual dedicated clip-ons rather than the do-all optics, because when you have an optic that does it all, there are definitely some, you have to make some trade-offs there. It's again, jack of all trades, master of none, whereas these kind of become more of that master of one, right? So not trying to rhyme, but there you have it. Now, because I'm gonna have dedicated reviews getting into all the details of these optics rather than going through them and regurgitating them, I'm going to talk about noteworthy features of each of these that may make them stand apart from the other units. So starting with the RH25 V2, the form factor is going to be your most noticeable feature because it opens the door for a variety of use cases. So it easily fits in a pocket. You can helmet mount it if that matters to you. And overall, smaller, lighter is typically considered better. So that is what makes the RH25 V2 stand out. The SIG CV25 V2 does not have an adjustable rear diopter. And although it's not technically a dedicated clip-on in the sense like what I talked about with the Operator 640, for example, with that negative magnification, what they did with the optics in this are absolutely incredible. And I think that's what stands out to me. In terms of the ocular assembly, the CV25 V2 hands down has the best and most comfortable eye relief and just how it conveys that to the user's eye when you're using it as a dedicated optic. Obviously, it looks good when you're viewing it through a daytime optic as a clip-on as well, but that is what I would say stands out. The other thing worth mentioning is this is the only one on the table that has a lifetime warranty. So if this is a huge pill to swallow in terms of making this kind of investment and you want to truly buy once, cry once, the lifetime warranty of SIG's electro-optics is insane. It's first of its kind, and that is a huge selling point worth mentioning as well. Now, the DNT Hydra does have a very good optical assembly here. It's very, for the money, I'm gonna go ahead and upfront just say this is probably the best value. Is it the best in all categories? Absolutely not, but it is an easier pill to swallow, spending about half as much on this as you would the CV25 and about a third compared to the RH25 V2. So that is a big deal. There's some, there's some cons, there's drawbacks to everything, and I go over those in my dedicated review, namely the weird mounting interface they went with that I believe as of this video is now fixed. You can get a different mounting options, but this is a good, I don't want to call it budget because $2,000+ is not necessarily budget to everyone, but this for an entry-level clip-on really does the job well. Noteworthy feature on the Armorsight Operator 640, again, it has a optically collimated ocular assembly, which is a big deal. It saves you some work that you need to do setting it up on the front end. It does use CR123 batteries. For some of you guys, you may like that. Some you may not. Everything else here is going to be running off of 18650, so that is a difference worth pointing out in the Armorsight. So the guide TB630 is also optically collimated as best I can tell because it was on target. You cannot digitally collimate this, so you can't make adjustments, but fortunately it was optically on and worked for the platforms I had tested it on. Noteworthy feature is it has the side focusing dials, so that is the only one that is more ergonomic. So when you have this mounted in front of your daytime optic, instead of reaching all the way around to try to adjust focus, it's right here on the side. A little bit more useful. The other thing is this is the one that I think thought out the menu system the most. When you go into the settings and menu, it goes to the center of the screen, whereas on most of these other units, I think all of them actually, your user interface, your menu, all that is somewhere around the edge of the screen. So if you're not zoomed out to 1 or 2x power with an LPVO, a lot of that information gets cut off. Guide actually was very clever in putting that information, including your battery indicator, centralized to where you can be zoomed more in optically with your daytime scope and not lose that information. Kind of crazy that these guys didn't think about that, but Guide did, and so that is also a noteworthy feature. Working our way into the actual comparison part of this video, I wanted to start with an out-of-the-box collimation test, meaning I defaulted everything to the factory settings, no digital calibration applied whatsoever, and shot at a foil target downrange. Now, in terms of the conditions, one thing to note is that this was a heavily overcast day, meaning no direct sunlight onto a foil target downrange. Additionally, the humidity was really high, which means that the environment from a thermal standpoint was pretty even, so not a lot of contrast because that humidity in the air is a decent conductor. No direct sunlight means not the best conditions for these units to be tested in, but that was done somewhat intentionally. It just kind of worked out. Now, the platform used is a Mark 12 that was zeroed, so a good baseline platform. And a quick view of the targets downrange, you can see I have a large central foil target, some smaller foil diamonds. There are 2 paper targets side by side, and then to the right, you'll see 3 pieces of foil tape. The RH25V2 did pretty solid in terms of thermal contrast. You can clearly see those pieces of foil tape to the right, as well as that main piece of foil on the target itself. One thing I did find interesting is you'll notice there's not impacts on target because the RH25 factory collimation did not have me on paper. On the CV25, the footage doesn't look too great because you don't really see that foil on that paper target. However, to the user's eye, it was fairly visible. I think there's a bit of a video compression rate happening here. Nonetheless, I am trying to compare the footage that comes out of each of these in comparable and fair conditions. The Operator 640 probably struggled the most in terms of what I could see to the user's eye when looking for that foil tape, so I kind of had to hold center of that paper target on the left. However, in the footage, you can actually see the foil better than you could in the CV25's footage. And I point this out because compression rates are going to do different things, and I'm really trying to speak to what I saw to the user's eye. The Hydra not only did fairly well to the user's eye, but the video compression actually looks pretty solid. You can clearly see the foil tape on that left paper target. So we're still getting good thermal contrast in these unfavorable conditions. So once again, the Hydra seems to punch well outside of its weight class. And the Guide actually ended up being the one that I could see the target the best to the user's eye. It is pretty well reflected in terms of the video that is recorded inside the unit. You can once again clearly see the foil tape on that left-hand target, and it was very, very easy to pick up to my eye when shooting through this at the range. Okay guys, so what a lot of you are just probably skipping to see, here are the actual results for testing each of these units right out of the box at the factory collimation setting. So no digital adjustments made whatsoever. All these units, it doesn't really matter how off they are because they are all adjustable, with the exception of the Guide SenseSmart, the TB630. So if that one was off, you're just out of luck. I do want to point out that on this Guide group, the mount was loose on the rail. Didn't notice it until after I tightened it and shot another group. So that's why it's on there for transparency, but we're going to throw that one out. 3 rounds were fired through each of these optics with factory settings. So using the SIG CV25 as an example, we got a nice dead center hit here, which is really going to help its average, and then 2 that were a little low there. So what I did is I measured where those were, and we got an average coordinate. So the average of the group for the CV25 is negative 0.41 in the X direction, negative 0.625 in the Y direction. Now, surprise guys, we're gonna do a little bit of trigonometry here. So here's the CV25 average. So point of aim, average point of impact was here. If you remember that Pythagorean theorem back from high school or maybe middle school for you, well, if we know the X and Y, then all we gotta do is calculate for that direct distance, which is that nice hypotenuse on that triangle, which is gonna give us the direct offset. So that is the 0.75 MOA that I'm going to tell you I got for the CV25 out of the box. Don't worry about this too much. I'm just showing you again my process and procedure so you understand where these numbers are coming from. So for the CV25, the out of the box collimation was 0.75 MOA. The guide was 0.93 MOA. Now, the guide group is better. The CV25 group is, I think, artificially a little bit better on paper because of that bullseye hit, but these are the results we got. Again, the guide cannot be adjusted, so the good news is it was within 1 MOA of repeatability, as is the CV25. So those two were sub MOA in terms of kind of gauging level of effort right out of the box, how much tweaking and zeroing you may need to do. Now, the armor sight operator was a 3.2 MOA offset from point of aim, point of impact, right out of the box. It is digitally adjustable, so you can fine tune it to your heart's desire, as is the DNT Hydra. It is also adjustable out of the box, but this one got an offset of 3.21 MOA, obviously under. I was aiming at this for the DNT Hydra because this started getting a little bit busy. But I think the craziest finding is that you notice there are no hits for the RH25V2. And when keeping in mind the overall height and width of this, that essentially means it has greater than about a 10.5, 10.6 MOA offset out of the box, meaning that of all of these, the RH25V2, the one that is most expensive, was in my sample size of 1 for all these, the least collimated out of the box and will require the most amount of work to get it collimated. So there you go, just a simple test. Again, you can adjust all these as fine-tuned as you would like, with the exception of the guide. And I thought this was an important parameter to cover for this video. And now for a more practical test. So for what it's worth, we got cows that are kind of in the foreground. We got some in the distance there at 550 yards, and I will pan to the right where there's gonna be cows at 900 yards. Now the conditions, it is sunset, so it's kind of in the middle in terms of a warm environment. It was 90 degrees out during the time of recording these. Now keep in mind, I'm just kind of showing you what is being exported here on the RH25V2, but as we look at all of these units, you've got to remember that this is also kind of a comparison of the video compression rate. So this is definitely not representative of what the user's eye is seeing. All of these look far better to the user's eye, but this is just a comparison point that I thought was worth showing. Now, with no surprise, the RH25V2 has no issues differentiating those cows in the foreground and the ones at 550 yards in the background, as it should not for a $6,000 unit, but we got to cover them all. So here's the RH25V2 as I cycle through all the different color palettes that are available on this unit. So choose what you want. I'm kind of a white hot or black hot guy. Sometimes that target mode where the hottest thing glows gives you some nice contrast, especially when using it as a clip-on optic. But again, just trying to show you what I can in as much detail as possible in this comparison video. And when panning over to the cows that you can kind of see there where the tree line is, those are at 900 yards from where I'm recording, and the RH25V2 did not have any difficulty in being able to see them. As I toggle through different color palettes, some are more useful at far range, so just keep that in mind when you are playing with these devices. Figure out what works at the intended ranges you want to use them at. But all of these were much more visible to the user's eye than this footage conveys. The CV25 is one where I think the compression rate kind of hurts it a little bit more in terms of drawing conclusions. To the user's eye, I think the CV25 is probably one of the most pleasing in terms of the thermal imagery that comes out of it. But in comparing the footage side by side, I guess I didn't realize how much the footage was compressed when I did my standalone CV25 review. But that is a lot more evident now because you see that the background, those cows at 550 yards in the CV25 downloaded, compressed, and then re-uploaded footage just doesn't look nearly as great as the RH25V2, but when using them side by side, I personally have a little bit more preference to the CV25. Now, I just point that out because again, we are kind of comparing video compression rates, which isn't necessarily apples to apples here. The CV25 compression rate becomes very evident because in this footage, it looks like those cows at 900 yards are almost not detectable whatsoever, but they were very clear to my eye when looking through this unit directly. And now it kind of makes me wish I would have done a camera rig of sorts to film this portion, but I did want to take some internal footage to compare for you guys. So if you care a lot about what your footage looks like when you export it, that is something to consider with this CV25. Maybe a future firmware update can help with that rate of compression, because I did take notes. I did jot down my observations when doing all this so I wouldn't forget it, and those cows were very clear to me, to my eye, at 900 yards to the CV25. The D&T Hydra once again impressed me in terms of kind of punching outside of its weight class. It looked very good to the user's eye, as does the footage, but one thing I did document in my observations is that it felt like the D&T Hydra's refresh rate was a little bit more sluggish, especially when comparing these side by side. So I know it advertises a refresh rate that is on par with these units, but I had assumed that maybe it was a 40 Hertz sensor when, again, comparing these side by side. That is one thing I noted. So take that for what it's worth. I'm not sure if the recorded footage is going to reflect that, but it just felt like that refresh rate wasn't nearly as fast as the other units that I compared. But the Hydra did not have any issues seeing the cows at 900 yards, both to the user's eye, nor is it having any difficulty in terms of video compression. It still conveys those very clear heat signatures 900 yards away, which was pretty impressive, again, considering the price point of the D&T HS635. The armor sight operator looked really good to the user's eye, especially when you're using it with an optical scope. But one thing I notice about the armor sight operator is that if you are not looking at something actually glowing in your environment, it does kind of lack in the contrast department. But once you actually pick up a heat signature like these cows, then the contrast kind of re-emerges. So if you're just panning a surrounding area that doesn't have anything alive or glowing, the image becomes a little less pleasing. But as soon as there's something that is putting off a heat signature, I think it is a pretty pleasing image, especially when looking through an optical scope. But once again, the operator, like the other units, can see those cows at 550 yards without much challenge whatsoever. As I cycle through the color palettes, it's pretty much good to go in this category. And the armor sight operator 640 also did not struggle with seeing cows at the 900 yard mark. There was pretty clear glowing heat signatures. These look smaller and larger on some because the focal lengths are not all the same on these units. So if you think that smaller, like right now, means it's bad, it's just a different focal length. The signatures were very visible and easy to differentiate from the environment, especially when looking through this with the naked eye. The armor sight operator also has some pretty heavy video compression as well. And the Guide SenseSmart TB630 looked very, very good. Once again, it really impresses me, and this is why I tell people don't sleep on Guide. They know what they're doing in the thermal department. You can see that pretty solid thermal imagery. You can see all those cows in the background that honestly are a little bit more evident through the Guide than they may have been on the other units. There's quite a few of them at 550 yards that in some of the other videos, after reviewing all these side by side, I don't know if you noticed all of them. At least I didn't until seeing this Guide clip. So the Guide is definitely an option worth looking into. And the TB630 makes easy work of seeing those cows at 900 yards. There's some really good contrast from the environment. You see a lot of the detail in the trees, but those cows still pop out at you very well. So it's a good balance of not losing too much of the environment's contrast, as well as really being able to distinguish those cows. So once again, the Guide does impress me, and that's why I keep saying it, but you really need to look more into guides. Another practical test I put these through is to look at a steel target that I attempted to have some level of thermal contrast with the white versus black paint since it's in the sunlight, and it does have divots from shooting these targets in the past before painting them. Now the RH25V2 was unable to distinguish the white from the black painted regions, but it did a very good job at seeing those divots. So just the ever so slight thermal contrast was picked up, and that is as a result of the sunlight hitting it at slightly different angles. So I was pretty impressed by that when looking through the RH25V2, but one interesting thing I noticed that was specific or exclusive to the RH25V2 is this temporary thermal burn-in that did go away after it nukes, but this sensor seemed very susceptible to that. The CV25 could not distinguish between the white and the black portion of the target, but the dimples were somewhat distinguishable. depending on the color palette that you use. So not all of them, but some you could just slightly make them out. The DNT Hydra has a bit of an advantage here because of the focal length. You could not distinguish between the white and the black, but you could see some of the divots made from rounds on that target. So this one also did about in the middle of the pack on this test. The Armor Sight Operator was probably on the lower end of the pack for this particular test. It also could not distinguish between the white and the black, and the little divots were not very clear to see as I cycled through color palettes. It was really just giving you the contrast of the overall target, but in this red color mode, you could pick them out just a little bit. So it seems like this unit prioritizes different things depending on the color palette that you are in. The guide, when looking through it to the user's eye, I had actually made a note that I could just barely see the white and black painted region. And as shown in the footage, you can see the dimpling on that steel target as well. So overall, the guide did pretty decent. The next test is just a simple synchronized motion test, so you can kind of see how that motion is actually captured. Once again, video compression rates do play a part in this a little bit, but just wanting to give you an idea of how good the imagery looks side by side and what the refresh rate and motion actually looks like. So if you're filming some pretty high speed or quick moving things, you kind of know what to expect. Now, one thing that I found interesting is the RH25V2 and the TB630 pick up a bug that is flying behind the fence, whereas the other units don't seem to be sensitive enough to do so. So you see that bug flying around right now, and I found that pretty interesting and wanted to point it out in case you missed it. Here's me looking like a crazy person to my neighbors, but trying to give you good motion footage. The next test is another practical one where I'm just doing the best I can to give you an idea of the point of view to each of these optics in terms of what the displays look like to the user's eye, how close your eye needs to be to see the full image, how far away your eye can be to see something through this optic in a useful manner, and just giving you an idea of the motion rate as you pan in real time with these optics. So this is more or less what you get out of the RH25V2, a fairly pleasing display. But I had mentioned earlier that the SIG CV25 is one of my most pleasing displays, and hopefully this gives you a better idea of how pleasing that image looks. Now you're not seeing the compression rate of the video, you're seeing as close as I can get it through a camera to what it looks like to the user's eye. And I find this display to be incredibly, incredibly pleasing, and the scale is almost perfectly one-to-one, true to life. The Hydra has a very good display for the money. You will notice you get a little bit of lens distortion as you get things further away. This is in part why it was difficult to get you a good camera view, because these things do different things, especially when you're looking at glass through different lenses. But overall, it has a very, very good display for the price point, and it will serve you pretty well as a handheld, clip-on, and dedicated optic. You can adjust that rear diopter on the Hydra to help with some of that weird warping effect, and in all fairness, I think it's getting exaggerated by the camera. Now, getting into the dedicated clip-ons, like I'd mentioned in the intro on the differences in the ocular assemblies, hopefully you didn't skip over that, but if you did, the Armor Sight Operator has a negative magnification. Now, when we're looking through this, that's why that screen feels like it's really, really far away, even when I get closer to the camera lens. That is going to give you an advantage when you're using it as a dedicated clip-on, because you're going to be able to use a higher base magnification optical scope behind this thing without losing the field of view. Subscribe if you like cats. Even if you don't, please feel to subscribe, but this is giving you an idea of that nice thermal contrast you get with the Armor Sight Operator. Again, none of these look as pleasing when I'm showing you the recorded footage as they do to the user's eye. The Guide TB630 is once again a pretty solid performer for the money. This again gives you an idea of what that negative magnification looks when we are looking through the guide. I would say it almost has more negative magnification than the Armor Sight Operator when we are comparing it in the same scenario. But that's why this thing is not going to be that great as a handheld monocular, and it's not going to be great at all as a dedicated optic, but it will be great with a clip. Okay guys, this is as close as I can get it in a practical sense in terms of what I see through the Vortex Razor 1 to 10. We're looking at a steel target that I've been heating up with that propane burner you kind of see there on the bottom. I have a frozen water bottle peeking up above the head. There's a metal fence in the background. The sun's going down, so that's going to change temp, and then that's a little bird feeder, for what that's worth, sticking out next to that target. So here is the Guide TB630. And I'm going to do the best I can to get things to look like they do to my eye. Please keep in mind, this is not going to look nearly as good to you guys as it does to the user's eye. It is really hard to do it justice through a camera setup, but I did what I could. But I'm still going to have to make manual adjustments as I zoom into different ranges. If the camera gets offset a little bit, we're going to lose some of that field of view optically. That's not what you see to the eye, but just bear with me. I'll mention when it's me adjusting the camera so that you know. But here is the field of view, as well as kind of a thermal dynamic range test. We have a frozen water bottle behind that hot silhouette that I am gonna hit with a burner in between takes to keep it warm to the touch. So this is the Guide SenseSmart TB630. At 1 power magnification, no problem whatsoever. You have the entire thermal sensor. Once we get to about 2x magnification, here's where I'm gonna have to refocus the camera, and that where I'm losing some field of view on the right is an effect of the camera, not the clip-on. So at 2 power, we start losing that horizontal field of view, and then on the Guide, we now start cropping into the vertical at about 2.5, 2.75. Everything still looks very, very clear. So now what I'll do is, for all these, I'm just gonna crank it to 10 power for the sake of not keeping you around for 2 hours. You want me to get to the point, I wanna get to the point, so here to please. Here's what that Guide looks like. And it is still very, very sharp. Obviously, we're zooming in on screen pixels, so this is what you're gonna see to your eye, but you can see how it's gonna help you make a more precise shot overall. So not bad. Now, other thing worth mentioning on the Guide is, even, let's say, let's go ahead and go to 4 power. The Guide is definitely purpose-built as a clip-on, because when I hit the menu function, and you can see how well my camera is aligned right now. So it's centered when it's properly mounted on a rifle, but the point being, the menu goes to the center of the screen, and it's not top, bottom, left, or right to where you lose that in the peripheral of your view. So Guide definitely did it right on this. They built a pretty good thermal clip-on, and just wanted to show you that as part of covering this unit. So similar to the Guide, the Armor Sight Operator has negative magnification, so we do have that nice looking full field of view at the rear. So looking pretty good. It is able to distinguish between that hot and cold, so we're not cropping some of that in terms of thermal dynamic range. Go ahead and go to 1.5 power. So at 1.5, we start losing the horizontal, so we're losing it a little bit earlier than what was on the Guide. And we start losing the vertical at about 2.75 power. So that is pretty much on par with the Guide. So they likely have a similar negative magnification there on that optical assembly, because they are both pretty much purpose-driven clip-ons. So that looks pretty solid there. So now let's do the resolution test. And when I reviewed the Armor Sight, I was pretty pleased with how things held up. So let me make sure the camera is in focus as much as I can. And I did pre-focus the thermal prior to doing it through a camera so I could see it better. So here is 10 power on the Armor Sight Operator. And once again, it holds up pretty good to where it will help you make a more precise shot, although you are pixelated. So just kind of pixel peeping here, seeing what we are up against. Okay, so the D&T, since it has that interesting optic height difference, I'm not using it perfectly with a 1.5 inch mount because I don't have that. So we're getting some anomalies through the camera lens where you're seeing some weird distortion more towards the edge, like you can see the info, the readout on the top. That's not what you actually see to the user's eye when looking through a scope, even if the scope isn't perfectly aligned at the center. But with all the lenses we're filming with, this is what happens. So you can, however, kind of get a feel for the field of view. And on that note, this is gonna be the first of the thermal clip-ons that we're talking about that don't have that negative magnification on that optical assembly in the back. So you can see where, even though I'm at 1x on this Vortex Viper, we're already filling up that field of view. And that is where these 3-in-1 or 2-in-1, whatever, the multi-devices, they really are jack of all trades, but master of none. So this is where it may potentially hurt you on the clip-on side, is you are already filling up that field of view optically at a 1x magnification. So if you're someone who doesn't have an LPVO, something to consider, because we're already losing the horizontal, and at 1.5 power now, yeah, roughly at 1.5 power, we're starting to fill the vertical as well. Now, is it a big deal? Not really, but you can see where you're gonna start losing that information readout, which that could potentially be a challenge. So bear with me. We're gonna go up to 10 power, and I'm gonna see as best I can if we can get this to show you everything. This is where it's a struggle, guys. Bear with me. Okay, so here's the DNT Hydra with the screen brightness turned down, just to try to think some of that was causing some additional flare. So just another look at pixel size, even though it's really not the best image, unfortunately, that is coming out of this because of the misalignment. Okay, so for whatever optical phenomenon, camera does not like to play well with the RH25 V2 in terms of being able to focus both the reticle and the imagery at the same time. So I'm going to prioritize the actual screen just so that you guys can follow along a little bit better. Like I said, it's going to be a struggle, guys, but doing the absolute best I can for you on this. So here is the field of view. Even in that clip-on mode at 1x, you just barely have everything. We're kind of starting to crop the corners. As soon as we get to 2, that's really about 1.75 magnification, we start losing that field of view in the vertical direction as well. So you don't have nearly as much give on the RH25 V2. So like I said, before 2x, you start losing some of that field of view. And let's see if we can get a usable image for comparison out of the 10 power. So I'm gonna focus. There we go. Okay, so now we're getting some fringing, which is the purple and bluish weird colors. That is, once again, a camera artifact. You don't see that to your eye, but we can get a gauge on pixel size on the RH25 V2 here. So hopefully that helps. So there is what you can expect on the RH25 V2. So I know that the screen is improved on the V2 over the V1. I've never looked over the V1. To my eye, and doing this comparison side by side, I'd actually say so far the RH25 is maybe one of the lesser impressive screens, but you guys be the judge. They all look great to the user's eye, and the camera, I think, exaggerates things, but this is, you know, I'm learning as I film this and as you guys watch this. Here is the CV25. So at 1 power, we are not losing any of the field of view, maybe a little crop in the corners. So far, so good. Let's see. When we reach right around a little over 1.5 magnification, we do then start losing the vertical. So a little bit sooner than some of the others. Let's go ahead and go all the way to 10 power. Try to get this all in focus as best I can. The CV25 does not have a focusable rear diopter, so we are at the mercy of what I can do with my camera here, which looks like it's not going to be too great, unfortunately. So we're getting some artifacts, kind of like what we did with the DNT, which is definitely not representative of the CV25. This is probably one of my favorite displays of the bunch. I was really hoping to convey that, but in terms of just being able to look at pixel size, hopefully this gives you a feel for the pixel size on the CV25. So there's the CV25 pixel size, as close as I can try to get this camera to play nicely, but again, getting some artifacts unfortunately, so there's only so much I can do. But once again, it works reasonably well, even at that 10 power when we're pixel peeping. If there's insights that I didn't quite convey in this video, please leave a comment. I'll do my best to respond to them. The best place to get in touch with me and really get that one-on-one, input would be Patreon. I prioritize trying to respond to the people there, obviously over all the hundreds of YouTube comments I get across the videos that I publish. Again, if you really appreciate this kind of video, I ask you to please consider subscribing to the channel. It is a bigger help than you think, and it tells YouTube that, hey, people like these videos, we should show them in more feeds instead of burying them and shadow banning them. So again, any help you can provide on your end is greatly appreciated. To include if you want to opt to support the channel on Patreon and potentially win some of those monthly giveaways. But with that, I do want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and as always, have a good one.